Welcome to the third episode of the Living Room Podcast. I am your host, Marcus, joined by James the Liberated
Hello.
and Stratino Lampino.
Hi, you said and again.
Shut up. As well as the Schizoid Man.
Here, present.
Yeah, this is the roll call. You're
Roll
getting
call.
yeah. So both Stratino and Schizoid apparently have recently had an argument that they wanted to bring onto the show about gender and like its definitions. So let's just jump right into it, and I'll just leave the floor open for you to start that argument again.
I need
I'll
to
let
read your.
Stratino have the first
Oh,
words.
I was literally about to say you explain your position. But
I will take it.
Okay.
So, the issue with gender is that on a surface level, it is kind of natural to think about gender and sex, these two concepts, as meaning the same thing, as often the correlation between using these two words is so high that people never think about the nuance between what people implicitly mean by the difference between the concepts of sex and gender. And to illustrate what I mean, is that when people use the word sex, they're usually using it in a strictly biological sense. But people, when they use the word gender, or I mean the words behind the concept of gender, male, or sorry, man and woman, as opposed to male and female, respectively, for the concept of sex and the concept of gender, is that when people use the word man and woman, they add a um they add an expectation of gender norms to them that, hey, you should man up or you're acting like a girl. No one ever says you're acting like a male or you're acting like a female. You are a male and you are a female. And so there must be, if we look into this deeply, like how I just described, then there must be an actual distinction somewhere that defines gender different from the concept of sex. And now the question is that, well, either the first question is there a distinction? That would be one debate. And the second debate is, what is the proper definition of gender? Then there's a whole other discussion beyond those two things, is that is a concept of gender valid? Do we need the concept of gender? Do we need to ascribe gender norms upon people? Is that practical? And is that ethical? And those are all these interesting subjects that I've thought about, which I don't have any concrete opinions about them, but I have concepts of a plan, as a great man once said. And so when it comes to gender, I believe it makes most sense to base your gender off your sex. However, not to treat the concept of gender as the same as the concept of sex, but rather gender as a class prescription in order to fulfill the proper roles of a man or a woman in a given society, which those roles would be shaped by the society's values. You have anything to add to that, Stratino?
I think I've always agreed with you that there is a difference between sex and gender. However, um, I think there's actually three different things. Because there is, of course, the biological thing, which is sex, refer to, I guess, I think you agreed with me that like gametes are, I guess, kind of the best standard for that, even if it is a bit rocky.
Yes, the whole concept of sex is funny because both these concepts are rocky, and gender is based on the rocky concept of sex, which is already hard to define. But yes, we both agree the best way to define sex is based on gamete size,
All right,
which you
now,
may have to define gamete for the audience.
um, I mean, I guess you probably could define it better.
Well, sperms and eggs are gametes, according to the science, and the
TM.
males have the smaller gamete and the females have the larger gamete.
Yeah.
And so
And
that is what I guess is the most common, consistent common denominator against all the animals in the animal kingdom. It is most logical and most consistent to define males with the smaller gametes and the females with the larger gametes. The major problem with that is that if you just don't have any gametes to produce, such if you were neutered, are you no longer that sex? So that obviously gets rocky, but that's probably the best base we got.
yeah, so I have there's sex, which is the standard is that. Then there is gender, which I've always held as completely neurological and as brain structure. And then there are gender roles, which is the third concept, which I actually think is different because there's an aspect of free will with it. So there is man's nature. That's just kind of the sex and gender part. And then there's gender roles, which is an aspect of action, how you're orienting yourself. It's a gender orientation. Um, and I think that the difference between sex and gender is actually extremely important if we're to try to cluster these concepts into one thing. Well, now I mean, like, what of the, and this is actually something that gives the term transgender the most meaning, which is that there is a incongruency between a male, I guess like a male brain structure, and I don't know, maybe a female reproductive system. That would be an example of a transgender, like a actual valid transgender, and those things happen. Even if they are rare, they do definitely happen, and that's something that you have to. I mean, you can either get tested, or kind of discover it through introspection. Either way, um, those are kind of man's nature sort of things. What is it called? I think there is, um, because I remember it was, I don't remember the term for, I guess you not homogender. I forgot what it was. Hetero. That's what it is. Like hetero and trans. That's kind of the point of the two concepts is that a hetero is like a I guess a hetero gender would be two having the same brain structure which is congruent with your reproductive system, and then there's the concept of a transgender, which
If
is
they're the
one who
same, it would
has,
be homo.
yeah, yeah, that's what I'm remembering. I don't remember my Greek and Latin roots. I'm not being graded for this, am I?
You
I've
are
been
being graded.
using these words a lot as of recently, so
You're
it's
not being graded, but we are judging you
We
severely.
are, yeah, and
This is
so is
why
the
this is
audience.
no the audio. We're Christians here. We don't judge. Um,
This is
I
a
mm,
think
Judeo-Christian stream, guys.
It is.
yeah.
We stand with Judeo-Christian values.
We
we
say the
support
N
Israel.
word when the cameras are off. Um, so I think that that's like the best explanation of sex and gender. They are two different things. There is a distinction between, of course, a male and female brain structure and a male and female reproductive system, and those can overlap in strange ways. Now there is gender orientation, which it is, of course, we're not going to call it like sex orientation because that's a whole different that's a completely different thing. But gender orientation is what we call feminine and masculine things which, of course, by the brain structure is sort of tended toward. That's an aspect of free will, though. You're able to choose to act that way. A lot of the time you're brought up to act, feminine or masculine, of course. um but there is, and it does make sense actually, how like actual valid transgender people, when they're brought up, even in, I guess, for example, someone with a male brain structure, female reproductive organs, treated as a girl, starts to, not understand it, start to deviate, and then, you know later has gender dysphoria. That makes perfect sense, because of the brain structure is they're trying to fit them in a box that they don't fit in, so they sort of drift the other way. But I think that's kind of my main idea about it.
And see, I need a valid justification to base gender off the
Well,
neurological brain structure
I
of.
just kind of want to add. I think this is sort of like I haven't very much like thought too hard about it, and I haven't gotten into many arguments about it over the past like a couple of years ago I did, but like not recently, like especially not since like discovering like actual philosophy. But I think it makes more sense to sure gender and sex separate. Sex though I think more just refers to um like sex usually refers to across all um organisms with sexual reproduction, whereas gender usually just refers to those within humans, right? Like you don't refer to a male dog as a man. However, a
Well,
male
you do
human you
refer
refer
to it
to
as
as
a
a man.
boy or a girl. I
Oh
disagree.
yeah, true. Okay, yeah, I was never mind.
And often we refer to things that actually are not alive at all. We would not refer to a boat as a female, but
Yeah.
we would refer to a boat as by she, her pronouns because this drives home the point that gender is a I guess would the proper term be floating abstraction? Would that be the proper
Um,
term? Maybe not, but it's definitely an abstract concept
well, it's
in.
that actually is different, Schizoid. That comes from language, like how gendered things worked. I think it was French and
Yeah.
Spanish, which would call it like la, and that's
Yeah.
where you get her from. That's a different
Well,
thing.
point is that gender is not as not as concrete like sex, but rather abstractly and can be applied broadly to non-human things, both organism and non-organism.
I think that you are.
And
I
it
think
kind of drives home the point. I'm not really convinced on the idea of basing gender off the neurological structure of one's brain. I think we need to, if we want to define gender, I think we need to think about the terms man and women, abstracted away from our modern society and our modern technology and our modern knowledge, and refer to them more universally across all human culture, which all human culture have had their own ideas on and their own takes on gender, both prescribing a binary prescription or a non-binary prescription. Um, and to narrow it down to the neurological structures of the brain, to me, it's just not convincing. I don't feel convinced at it. And part of the reason why I don't feel convinced at it is that I'm not really convinced on, and I'm not saying this is your position, but oftentimes within the queer community, the probably most oftentimes, the qualification to be whatever gender you want to be is to simply wish it into reality. And it's a primacy of consciousness fallacy, that being the position that an I wish goes above and is primacy over and it is. You can be whatever gender you want to be because you wish it to be. And I'm not saying this is your position, but it sort of, and to me, reminds me or alludes to that kind of position where your gender is based off um how you feel. But I have skepticism towards that. Now,
I think
at the
there's some
same time
things.
of all of this, it's just I know I'm starting to interrupt you, but I just want to plant a seed here. At at the same time of all of this, um I also have skepticism towards the utility, the practicality, or the legitimacy of the concept of gender itself. I just sometimes I feel like why do we need this concept?
Well,
Sometimes.
the concept we like to describe people very quickly began like very quickly because I'm pretty sure it was what was it John Money that like introduced the concept of gender, and
Yeah,
then
John Money and Albert
I don't know if
Kinzel.
he introduced it. I'm pretty sure he coined gender and the concept
yeah,
and
yeah,
made an identifying
but like
label,
he
but obviously gender
well,
has
yeah,
been
he
with us.
introduced the like he was the first one to come up with a word separate from sex to describe the men and women,
He
and
brought it explicitly.
yeah, which very quickly, like the way it was used by people, it just referred to sex because there isn't like an actual use to this because what was he trying to do? Well, he was trying to um and I it's been a long time since I've at all thought about was it Kinsing and Money?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been since I was like a conservative that I have thought about that. But um but like my guess is that it was entirely driven by, oh, well, you should be like we should be able to just decide what to be. So we need this separate concept because obviously you can't just decide to have a penis or not to have a penis. But oh well, if we let's make this other concept and take these pre-existing categories of man and woman and make them, part of this concept called gender, and then using that we'll be able to simply decide, oh, will be the person will be able to decide whether or not they're a man or a woman, regardless of whether or not they're a male or female. To get around the facts of reality that males and females exist, and those are
Perhaps
physical things.
perhaps that may have been the intention of, obviously, there, and you're completely right that people used to not think about sex and gender separately up until very recently. And you may be right that the purpose of this agenda to bring it more explicitly had those ulterior, malicious motives. But I still think beyond that, that it is valid to separate those two concepts because if man, and I'm talking about man in a philosophical sense, not man in a gendered sense, but man, if alone on an island, does not need gender. He needs sex. He needs the concept of sex, but he does not need the concept of gender. It only is brought about in a human civilization that we see the rise of gender, as in this, that all males also have to be prescribed to act like a man, and to be a man prescribes certain norms and expectations upon the males in a society to act and behave in a certain way. And sometimes I feel like there is a justification for it. Particularly if I wanted to find a justification for it, it would have to be based on the legitimate proper roles of a father and a mother, which I do believe there are proper, moral, objective, general rules that a father ought follow and a mother ought follow, which are different from one another. But also that my own theory on to justify the concept of gender as a necessity would fall apart if you don't want to be a father or if you don't want to be a mother. Now that doesn't negate that the concepts of gender has arisen in many different forms throughout many different societies in many different ways. That does not negate that that happened. But sometimes I'm recalled to think, like how what you're kind of alluding to is like, this idea to separate gender from sex to bypass reality so you can be whatever you want is sometimes I think back or I step back and I think it's like, why do we need gender to begin with? I remember back in high school that I was very pro transgender, but my basis for being pro transgender back in high school was because I believed in gender abolitionism, which is that the to abolish the concept of gender itself. And so a part of me is still like that because a part of me is still skeptical towards the concept of gender. I think the only reason why I stopped being so pro transgender is because I kind of realized that to be skeptical of gender would have to also imply that you're skeptical of transgender. Many people in the queer community have this weird contradiction where they're pro transgender and also at the same time gender abolitionists. And it's a contradiction in a certain way, but it's also not a contradiction in a more literal way, in a more underlying way that people don't talk about. So in the surface level, it's weird in a contradictory way because because they're saying that transgender people are valid and also the concept of gender is invalid, but the concept of transgender can only be valid if it was resting on the valid concept of gender. So in the queer community, the concept of transgender becomes what is called a stolen concept fallacy, meaning a concept that is prescribed to be valid, but the concept that supports that concept is robbed and is invalid, and so it makes no sense that the above concept would be valid. It's called a stolen concept fallacy. And I came to that conclusion on my own that it must be a stolen concept fallacy. So why do I support either? And the underlying thing that is actually not contradictory but totally symbiotic is that in the modern movement, the modern transgender movement, the one where you can be whatever you want to be, um, in order to in order to be whatever you want to be, if in order to be whatever gender you have to invalidate the concept of gender itself. If you invalidate the concept of gender itself while still using those labels, terms, identities, and still using the concept as a stolen concept, if you rob the validity of it, then you can control whatever you want to be in the public's eye.
Today is the
Well,
Schizoid show.
Schizoid, I have a just one like question. So
Yes.
like if it is that gender describes gender describes like the sort of expectation or like the role model for males and females, then is a male who doesn't meet those like expectations or doesn't like aspire towards that role model, are they then not a man, like in a a guy or a male that doesn't aspire towards these expectations and doesn't meet those expectations, does he then cease to be a male
Let me answer that question with another question because it's so fun
or
to
a
do
man
that.
not a male?
I know what you meant. Well, let me answer it with another question. If to be a student is to go into an institution of learning and be a learner yourself, but you go into that institution and you actively fail at being a learner, is a bad student not a student anymore?
um well, yeah, but it's, well, a student is someone who's there, like is under the teacher. It's, like, maybe not the best analogy because the student describes doesn't describe the process of learning. The student describes the process of attending the school.
And that's what I think about gender is that like, to be a man is not the gender roles themselves, but to be a man is is the identification of what to prescribe upon that person. Now, if they
Mm-hmm.
fail to meet those
Okay.
gender expectations, it does not rob them of their identity. Their identity is necessary in order to figure out what to prescribe them. It's funny. If I may tell a funny story, I have long, curly, and may I say, beautiful hair, actually. I'm like Donald Trump. I have beautiful hair. I have the greatest hair. And I was watching myself at my work on the camera feed, and I found myself and I was like, "Who's that going into the back office? Who's going into our employee area? This woman." I was looking at the back of my own head, and it was me. And I was like, "Wait, no, that's me." It's like I thought of myself as a woman at first because I saw the back of my own head, which I had long hair. Anyways, so when I'm trying to identify that person, which was me actually, but identify that person in our employee section of our workplace, and I was like, "Oh, there's a woman there." And so, as I'm identifying someone as a woman, I'm prescribing expectations on how they are going to behave or should act. If someone came in with a really pretty summer dress and was a girl, um, and was a female and came in with a really pretty summer dress, to be like, oh, that's a really pretty girl. But if a male walked in with a summer dress, I'll probably be thinking a lot of things, not necessarily negative thoughts. We don't want to be discriminatory or bigoted, but I probably won't
Maybe a
be
little.
thinking it's a pretty girl. I'd just probably be thinking at the broadest point, I'll be thinking that's weird and that's strange, but I think that's normal if a female does it. So when I'm even though that male that may be wearing a summer dress that would walk into my store would be failing to meet his expectations, I'm identifying him as a man in order to judge if he is failing or meeting the expectations that I would place upon him as he is a man.
I mean,
I
I
I
can sort of interject a little bit here and just say that while there certainly is a conversation to be had here, I do think that gender and it's sort of in a contemporary context, mostly in the context of culture war related phenomena and such, I think it can best be described as an anti concept. Actually, because I think that it tends to lack sort of coherency between
James,
most contexts.
may you, for the audience, tell us what an anti-concept is?
May I, for the audience, tell you what an anti concept is?
For the audience, I know we all know what an anti-concept is, but may you tell us
Oh
and
well,
clarify what
it's
it
just
is?
simply that there aren't really many clear properties within how the word is used to to sort of demarcate any sort of boundaries for how to employ the word, the concept specifically. So it tends to obscure meaning and such. And
Not
even though
not to be meta, but I feel like that definition actually kind of obscures what I think about the concept of the anti-concept.
I,
I
I mean,
usually think of the anti-concept as in the explicit definition given contradicts the implicit definition that people think of. So like for example, as the concept of capitalism as an anti-concept, for example, would be capitalism is when we have a free market, just like the United States. The explicit understanding and the implicit understanding contradict each other.
um, so I mean, I suppose you could
they do.
say that, but I mean, would what I'm saying not work in that context? Because I think that the way in which it's employed, it tends to switch almost arbitrarily between, I mean, literally saying it's arbitrary to saying that there are actual set norms of that demarcate gender as a concept. Okay, so like man from woman and such, and that's how you have many like online left wing crowds discussing concepts such as gender dysphoria and such, and that
Yeah, you're
allows
absolutely
for
right.
a lot of culture war phenomena, uh, which shows itself in the mainstream. And I think that it's all a bunch of nonsense meant to obscure more important political issues.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yes, but I'm not saying that the conversation you guys are having is completely meaningless. I'm
No,
just
no, no.
saying that,
I wasn't thinking that
yeah,
either.
yeah.
No,
I
but
just
you
want to make
provide
that
important
clear.
context.
It certainly
Yeah,
is
Like
part of the culture war meta narrative.
exactly.
Meta-narrative. We said the word marinette, never, never narrative.
Marin,
another.
We
Right.
said
I
the
just wanted to
word.
make that clear.
Oh my
Okay,
at
I just
least
wanted to
god.
once
make
per
that clear.
episode. Did we say
At
it once
least
per
I
once per
episode?
episode, we need a bingo card of meta narrative, technique. It's a James bingo card.
James bingo card. James gobbledygook bingo card. I've been
Official
waiting for
living room
10.
James bingo cards will be dropping at some
I
point
have
in the next 6 to 8
Okay.
years.
I have
Merch,
been waiting for
merch.
like 10 minutes to ever answer Schizoid's question that he asked me.
Leotard to be proud. Okay. I'm sorry. I kind of went on a
I
bit of a
swear, like I was about to
yap.
explain it, and then Gamerizer jumped in. Everyone jumped in, and it was like that was the main question that Schizoid was asking me in the first place. Was
Okay.
like the
Culture war
proof
meta narrative aside, Suchino,
the,
continue.
the proof of the I guess the neurological aspect of it. So schizoid. You understand, of course, that like animals and human beings are on different levels
Yes.
of consciousness. So animals are, of course, on the perceptual level. Do you know that animals, depending on their brain structure, like their male or female brain structure, act different in the wild?
It is true. And to clarify to the audience what he meant by the perceptual level, to clarify what we mean is that man the philosophical species humans operate with the capacity to reason, and animals do
Mhm.
not have the capacity to reason. Anyways, yes, I am aware of that animals do behave differently based on the neurological makeup of their brain based off their sex, and I am aware that for humans, our neurological makeup, if it's in accordance with what goes on down there in our pants and other aspects of our body, that the neurological makeup is part of what makes up someone's sex, and oftentimes, not oftentimes, why did I say that? But sometimes people's other sexual characteristics do not line up correctly at birth. And so I am obviously aware that people can have a neurological makeup of a female and the rest of their body is male makeup or vice versa. So I'm
Uh-huh.
aware of
And
that.
and I think that not only is that my point about gender is that that's the gender part, is the neurological part. But I remember you saying that on an island, just stranded on an island, there's no need for that concept. But under my point of the neurology of it, the fact that there are, of course, there are brain structures that, I mean, they kind of are based on the sexes, but they can, of course, differ. Like we get that. Um, there are needs for that, because to understand that, you know, similarly to how animals act differently in the wild based on their gender, there is tendencies for men to be, more whatever, like competitive, or is it primal, or more feisty, or they act differently, especially like a woman, how hormones affect their brain compared to how a man's hormones affects his brain. They're different, and it's just as almost just as, like understanding that you have like a perhaps a tendency in your family genetically to gain schizophrenia is to be noted. There's also that neurological aspect to be noted, stranded island on an island as well. That should be known. Aspects of the nature of your brain structure, neurology, should be known, because that can affect what you want to do. Someone who's prone to epilepsy may need to understand that in order to avoid bright lights. Someone who is prone to schizophrenia may need to avoid specific things, whatever can induce schizophrenia, in order to not have that initiated. Someone with a male brain structure may need to avoid specific things to validate his nature, just as a woman does as well. Things that you eat, things that you, I mean, like whatever else. But eating is the one I'm thinking of. Um, because I mean, I've also had to figure that out when I've been trying to gain weight. I found out that there are aspects of my brain that, like men, stress, like stress is a big one. I'm far more prone to stress based on my brain structure. So I need to understand that, in order to, figure out how to act.
I don't
Those
disagree with everything you're saying. I don't think I'm disagreeing with anything you're saying. However, my problem is that I don't see a reason to define gender based on the neurological makeup of the mind. I don't see a justification for that. I see the justification if your nature, the nature of your unique being calls for specific moral acts to be performed, that is completely fine. And if that contradicts the gender expectations placed upon you based on your gender, and you need to contradict that, that is completely fine. And perhaps we can even have those sub concepts such as we have for other aspects like femboy and tomboy.
the
Is another thing.
femboy normative structure.
The thing is that my point is that a femboy is still a boy, and a tomboy, even though it's kind of weird saying a femboy's a boy and a tomboy's a girl, but a
Tomboy.
tomboy
Tomboy.
tomboys are girls and femboys are boys, but femboys act feminine and tomboys act masculine, but they're still male and, oh, sorry, not male. They are, but tomboys are still women and femboys are still men or
And
Yeah,
also,
boys.
and
they're not hyper politicized concepts.
also,
Point is that and point is that like just and so that's one example right there. Like a man can still be a man while acting feminine. So,
So
I
I'm
feel
so
like I'm
here's
losing track. You go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. So here's my point of why gender being applied to neurology, and then gender,
Well,
and then like my third
I
concept,
I, I
gender.
just want to real quick just add like
No.
standard usage of the term gender
Oh my god.
doesn't refer to mental
It
state.
actually does. Like this is something that has been so obscured by like the culture war. But like most of the academic papers that I've read about this, and there's also a really good Professor Dave Explains video on this, who and he actually cites a lot of the papers that I've read. That the way that I'm explaining it is actually the way that it is professionally understood. A lot of the time, if you go on Google Scholar and you kind of go through a lot of these articles, a lot of what I'm saying is kind of backed up a lot by the science. And I'll explain to Schizoid, I guess, the other point of why it's because I brought up animals. um Gender is still a thing, still a concept with animals. I'm explaining that since humans are conceptual and they need ethics, that's the third concept, that's when the gender norms come out. I'm establishing that there are two different parts there. Of course there's
Animals themselves don't need the concept of gender. They don't have concepts to begin with.
no, that it's the you get my point. Like, for humans to analyze animals, it's not that I'm saying that animals have concepts. You know that. Like, I mean, that's almost like saying that there's no need for a concept of sex in animals, but obviously there is.
No, I'm saying
Um,
animals don't need concepts. Of course, we need to apply concepts to animals. I was just saying,
uh-huh.
just
And
to
we
clarify.
need to when we need to apply concepts to animals, we understand that there's, the reproductive parts of animals, and then there's the, like brain structure part of animals. There needs to be a concept for that.
Oh
And
wait,
where
hold up.
that
May I interrupt something?
Oh my god, yes.
Thank you. Um, when we apply the concept of gender to animals, that's more of a byproduct of the necessity for the concept of gender itself, if there is such a necessity. We're just assuming here. But when we apply the concept of gender to animals, it's actually not necessary. It's more
Wait,
of just
did
a
I?
fun thing to do. We absolutely
Um,
don't need that. We need that for assuming if we do need it, but we need that for humans to identify them in order to prescribe social norms to them. But we don't need to prescribe social norms to animals. We just only need to
but
just
that's not the point. You're still thinking of gender as the social norm part. I'm making a distinction between the nature, which
ah,
the
I'm
nature.
dumb. Okay, go
Yes,
ahead. My
yes.
bad.
So it's actually not the gender norms part, because like I said, I make a difference between the gender, which is the basis, the nature of the brain, which would,
Wait, but I made a distinction between gender and gender norms too.
you did? What?
Remember the whole conversation with me and Gamer, and he was talking about if a man does not meet the expectations of a man, is he a man still? And I said yes, and here's why. And I gave a whole spiel about why he's still a man, even if he does not meet his gender norms. And I made there is a distinction, of course.
Oh my god, were we agreeing the entire time?
No, because I don't think gender is based on
The way you
the
start.
neurological structure of your brain. I think gender is based on your gamete.
Oh, so this is the part. So, no, this is where we disagree. Like, how would the this is do you just deny the male and female brain structures as the I'm so confused.
I don't deny them. They do exist. I just deny
Mhm.
them as the basis for gender. Just like how I
Um,
don't de- just like how I don't define don't, it's just like how I don't base the concept of a woman based on if that person has titties or not. Titties is another facet, is another characteristic of sex, just like the brain structure, but it's not the primary characteristic of the sex, and of the sex, the primary characteristic that seems to be the best contender for being the primary characteristic would be the gamete. And
and
so that means that in order to, if we're going to base gender on sex, and we're going to base gender on like what determines the sex, The sex is determined by the gamete. And I don't see any reason to base gender on a secondary sexual characteristic, such as the male-female brain structure or titties.
Because that's the part which would prescribe the norms of which for you to act based on the gender roles.
Okay,
Norms of
when
which
I
for
mean
your
norms, when I mean norms, I don't mean like this goes back to like the whole thing like okay, I'm skeptical of the concept of gender itself because I don't see a justification to prescribe gender norms. If we are going to prescribe gender norms, here's the concept of gender. But as the basis, but beyond that, I don't see an actual moral justification to prescribe gender norms. So I have
I'll
skepticism towards having the. Is there a necessity for the concept of gender
I'll
itself?
I'll do it then. I'll try to do it again. It's that
No,
there
but
is
I already heard you. You talked about yes, like your brain structure will determine how you should act, and I did not deny that. It is absolutely true. If your
yes,
brain structure calls for certain actions that contradict your gender norms, go for it. But that's not the basis of gender.
why not?
Well,
It's
that's
com
on
it
you to prove. I mean, as I understand it, gender is based on sex, but you're saying gender is not based on sex, it's based on a specific sexual characteristic, such as the brain structure. But I need that burden of proof to be on you.
because one, there's already, of course, that this is already established thing. So male and female is the reproductive part. We've got that with this a full complete concept. That's nice. We can ship that off now. And then there is correlation between, of course, the sex part and then this brain structure part, which has not been defined of anything, but is sort of the genus for a lot of the norms which would come from, that brain structure. And
I don't think the brain structure is the genus of the norms.
why not?
Well, I don't know the genus for the norms really to begin with, because I'm
Well,
skeptical of the norms themselves.
well, my point was that my main point was that the different brains, because there is a, do you want me to like list the characteristics of a female brain, a male brain,
I
or do
don't
you
know
already?
why you would do that. I don't see
Well,
how that's
because I'm trying
relevant.
to establish that they exist. There
I
is a
do agree
difference.
that they exist.
Okay, so you agree that there exists. There's a difference between them, and
Hmm.
they're correlated with the sex.
Yes.
All right, now I mean, I think that's all that's really needed to establish that there needs to be a new concept such as gender to apply to that, and then based on, the different structure of the brain, which causes different tendencies,
Why can't we
then
just say female brain structure and male brain structure?
because what are you gonna call that? What's that
Female brain
grouping?
structure and male brain structure.
Yeah, but what is that? Like, is that
the concept is brain structure.
yeah? And I'm saying that that brain structure and gender are the same thing, because Schizoid said that,
But
without that you
why?
don't really need that concept, because you kind of said you were able to throw it away. So I'm saying, hey, look at this word. We can use it to apply it to this.
But
Because you can
there's no
also
utility. There's no utility to it.
but we can also call sex just,
But
gamete structure.
Stratino, this is so what you're
Why don't we
saying
just
is
call it
that
gamete structure?
um like should you like let's say we took gender and used it specifically to describe brain structure.
Hmm.
Would that mean that someone with a female brain structure is necessarily a woman?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It,
See,
I mean,
I assuming that you're correct in this, I don't think that would be the case because a woman more often refers to the the physical rather than the psychological.
that would be female, wouldn't it?
Well,
But
no, but like I'm
gender is
saying in the
based
way that
off.
woman is used. in the same
In the way
scale.
that women would use,
And
but I think that
to
women would be-
Steelman Gamer, I don't know if Steelman is the correct term, but to add on to Gamer's point, it makes most sense to say that gender is based off your sex, which
they're
the
heavily
closest
correlated.
approximation to your sex is what's in your pants. And then if you can determine what someone's sex is, then you can determine what someone's gender is. Of course, you can't look into someone's pants all the time, so you
Yes,
rely
but
on other characteristics.
the point is that
But
they're heavily correlated, but that one is not necessarily going to be, going to presuppose the other.
I agree with that. I agree
Okay.
without I agree, but I don't see the reason why gender needs to be based off the brain structure. If you
Well,
know the
so
whole
why does sex need to be based off of the gametes?
well, I thought we agreed on that.
Let's say I disagree now.
All right, let's say that you disagree.
Yeah.
Um,
Why don't we just call it gamete structure, like how you told me that we need to call it brain structure? Why can't we just call it gamete structure? But you're calling it sex, and then I'm like, okay, yeah, that works. All right, and it's like, okay, so now we have this word
oh, I
gender.
know the
Now,
reason why. Well,
okay.
okay, so like when we define words, of course, we have to consider the English language, and so
Mhm.
you know, that's what we call sex, but we've never called gender what is like based on your brain structure. That's never historically happened. I know you were talking about that's what it's referred in academia, but academia is off there in La La Land and not here on the ground
I
in
disagree.
common English language. Common English language treats gender and sex as the
Much of
same thing.
much
That
of
is a
common
fact.
academia has been what shapes language. Schizoid.
Less so
No.
than like just common people.
No,
Not actually.
common people shape language.
It's actually a bit more new because if referring to a lot of the time, it was the intellectuals, especially.
It doesn't matter.
Well,
Here
you're talking about the history of it, and so
most
I'm trying to get
people
at the
Well,
history of
talking about the history and in modern day, people treat gender and sex as the same concept because gender is based off this concept of sex, and if you are a sex, that determines your gender. That is always how it's been.
it. It's
And so,
always how it's been. It ain't gonna change.
well, I'm not saying it ain't gonna change, but I don't see a reason to change it. That's the point.
So what is gender? Like what
Gender
do you? Yeah.
Gender is someone who is a male, and specifically, it goes
That's
beyond the
sex.
concept of male. It goes beyond the concept of male because it prescribes that male with certain gender norms.
That's gender norms. Now,
No, no, no,
but
no, it's
wait,
not gender norms because gender norms is the prescription, but gender is the identification. So
but
like
aren't you
it
just
would be
calling?
like it'd be
But
like
that's
a rock is the identification, and the nature of the rock would be well, it's nature, like what we're prescribing its characteristics to be, but the identification itself is different from its characteristics.
um. So let's see.
Like I said before, you
You'd
could
have to
fail to
illustrate
meet
this
the
with.
I will illustrate it right now. You can
All right.
fail to meet the expectations of a man, but you're still a man. And the whole reason why you're a man is so that we can identify what to prescribe you. Now, whether you fail or meet those expectations is beyond the point. The point is that the purpose of the concept of man, in the gender sense, not the philosophical sense, is so that we can prescribe you something, these gender norms.
Isn't that just sex though? Then what is?
No, it's not.
Okay.
If
I
like let's
still
go
don't get
back to
this
the
difference.
island, and now let me explain why there's the concept of gender norms, and that's separate from the concept of sex, because there's no if man is alone on an island, if he was born alone on an island and died alone on an island, there's no reason to prescribe these social norms upon other people, since there is no society. So there would be no need for gender. Gender is simply just an extension to the concept of sex to identify someone and then prescribe them those norms. While the former sex, you're just identifying them as a male, but there's no expectations upon them.
So I still genuinely do not even get this because I guess what you're saying is that. So I get that the sex part is male and female, and then gender is identifying that they're male or female.
Wait, repeat that. I was looking at a squirrel out my window.
Squirrel.
He's
Squirrel.
Um,
actually a dog.
No, I've done this multiple times.
Wait,
Remember that one time,
wait, I'm
Stratino,
the
when we were in
dog.
a VC and I was in my car and you were saying something like you were
oh
trying to
yeah,
be
and you were like,
serious?
oh my god, there's a cat.
I'm like, there's a cat and it's running up a
He's
tree. It's
literally
going on
just a
top of the
dog
building.
looking out the window.
Okay, so your concept of it is so sex is male and female, and then gender is the identification the of the what?
It's simply just a means to identify that person in order for the purpose to prescribe those gender norms. So, like, for example, if you were to identify someone just as a male, then all you need to know is that they're a male, they have these biological attributes to them, but there's no social norms to prescribe them. What gender serves is that you're identifying the same thing, but now the purpose of it is to say, okay, but now we're going to prescribe these norms onto you. Act like a man, act like a woman. And then there's the norms.
I think,
So
Schizoid, you might
I
be unnecessarily differentiating between gender and sex. Because, like, the way you're describing it, you're like trying to figure out, oh, this is why gender and sex are different, but I don't think you're actually like proving that they're different, right? I think
The reason why
it
they're
makes more
different,
sense
it
for
goes
them
back
to
to
be
the
the same.
island. It goes back to the island. If you isolate man outside of a social con content, then there's no reason to have the concept of gender. But if you put
norms,
man into a social content, into a context, if you put man in a social context, a societal context, then you would need the concept of gender in order
norms,
to identify them to prescribe norms. So, like, for example, if let's just say let's put man in a social context, but without the concept of gender. Okay, you can identify them as a male, but the concept of male has no prescribed norms to it. So you can't prescribe norms to them because the identification of male would have no prescribed norms. It would be like if I were to try to prescribe gender norms onto someone based on their identification of them being having a driver's license or not. If they have a driver's license or not, or let's make it more related to sex. Like, let's say that they have titties or not. Let's just say that. Let's just say female breasts, not just like, you're a fat man, but if you have titties or not. But the concept of titties has no prescribed gender norms to it. So even if you were to identify them on that specific sexual characteristics, you would, by this isolated in context scenario, would have no means to prescribe the gender norms because this concept titties has no gender norms carrying with it, and that goes with this also with sex. So you need an extension to the concept of sex, gender, that does carry those norms with them in order to prescribe those norms onto people.
that is like unironically so convoluted, and I felt I kind of
I'm not
dozed.
saying I'm not saying it's not convoluted. It surely is.
It almost feels like an anti-concept itself.
I don't think it's an
Or
anti-concept.
not even like I guess because we're using the definition of
Oh,
I
so you're
use
saying
I
it's
actually
not because you don't think it is? Wow. What an
I'm gonna
I
objectivist
think
kill
you
you're
you.
are.
I'm
fine.
gonna I'm gonna
Hey,
kill
I'm
you,
not saying
James.
I know shit. Hey, I'm pretty loosey goosey with the whole debate itself. I'm not solidified one way or another. I don't even know if I even think gender is a valid concept to begin
I,
with. Like,
I've read Stratino.
I'm just assuming that we need gender norms in order to validate the concept of gender. But if we don't need
Well,
gender norms, then we don't need gender.
being real, I'm pretty sure the only reason why gender is like such a common term and is like has been used in common language is because people don't want to say sex because sex also is a process that generally you don't want to talk about in front of children. And so people found this term, oh, gender, we'll just use that to mean the same thing but without having to say sex because then, that's
Hold up,
also means another thing which we don't want to talk about in front of kids.
hold up. People don't point at someone and just say gender or sex What they do is
Yeah.
that they say you're a man and you're a male and you're a woman and you're a female.
Well, I'm saying
So
the
they're not.
terms.
Wait, let me finish. Wait, so they're not saying like, oh, the terms male and female are gross. That's like a taboo word. We should make a more nicer word for them, man and woman. Male and female are not taboo, weird, disgusting words. Like the word sex is actually a gross word because that also has the other definition of sexual intercourse. But um, so why would we have the concepts? Why throughout pretty much like in a lot of human societies, as far as I can recall, have at least in the West a concept male and female, these two concepts, and then over here we got these other two concepts, man and women, and virtually they correlate all the time. Why do we have these two things?
Well, no, it's there's
Obviously,
a
and obviously they have different. Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt one more time because I paused. I know it's your turn, but wait, I had one more thought. And obviously, it's not like these two terms throughout history have been used in the exact same way. They've had on a surface level aesthetic differences, male and female to refer to your parts as a person, like your physical parts, and man and woman to refer to something more spiritual or social. Like often male and female are not social terms, but clearly man and woman, these terms have social connotations, which leads me to believe this convoluted theory that I just explained to you guys.
well, the reason that there are the different terms man and male is because male refers to the gender or the sex, whereas man specifically refers to an adult of that gender, where as opposed to a boy, which is a child of that gender. Because the words don't mean the same thing because
True.
they also take into account age, right? That's
It's
why these
true.
separate terms exist.
You're
Um,
right. I can't deny that. However, my point still stands that the term man has a social connotation while male does not.
I also like to say that, when someone says, boy, you're going to become a man, I guess the idea is that, you're boy, you're going to need to uphold these specific norms.
It's not saying like, boy, you will grow up and become 18 or older one day. So
Must be
Stratino's
18
right.
or
There's
older
a
to purchase.
social, we cannot deny that male and female lack these social connotations that terms man and woman have. And also like where you bring up boy versus girl, also even probably even more social connotations than the word man and women. I mean, oftentimes a man and a woman, like referring to someone as a man or a woman, oftentimes is way much closer to the concept of adult male slash female human as compared to the terms boy and girl, which are less closer to the correlating concept of minor male female human. Often boy and girl even have a more intensified social connotation to it than man and woman, in my anecdotal opinion.
And, well, can I try to tie together? Because I
No.
did kill your.
Get off this VC. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I guess so. I wanted to, because I did bring up, son, boy, you're going to become a man, and I brought it up for a reason. Is that it's a it's maturity. It's a form of maturity, and us as, I guess, anarchists and libertarians, we've always understood that, psychological maturity, as one becomes, as just as one comes out of that drifting state and is able to actually, like, um discern proper judgments, of alternatives and whatever, and acting whatever. It's a psychological maturity, which is why I think that it would still be better to apply the norms of gender to the psychological mental maturity, the brain structure. I'm sneaking this in again. I think it would make far more sense to apply it to that brain structure where the psychological maturity is going, where those norms then become important than something like the sex. Which
At
is
the
less
end of the
relevant.
day, it doesn't make sense because if someone looks like a female, they're a woman. And what I mean by look, I mean as in like they are a female, and I'm gonna call them a woman because they are a woman, and I don't care about their brain structure. And that's not how gender has been ever used. Man and woman has never been based on the brain structure.
Okay, boomer.
And it's evident if someone does not act like a man, they're still called a man. So it's evident on that has not been the terms man and woman has not been used in the sense of like how you feel up there in your brain. Again, it's just not saying that's good or
It's not
bad.
even.
That could even be bad, and then that could even be evidence against the concept of gender itself. But that's what it has been used as.
I mean, okay, I know how it has been used to cope or whatever. I guess I
Is
don't
that,
know what
is
else.
that how we're ending the debate? I think that's a
I
perfect way to end the
I
debate.
think that is a
Hey,
perfect way to. I don't know what else to say to that. It's just like everyone else has
we're
used
not
it
going
this
to
way.
agree anyways, because we had this debate before, so I didn't really expect us to agree anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my two
I don't.
cents.
It's you're just like
That
everyone
that
else
is
uses it that
quite
way.
literally like almost to the second the hour mark since the debate
That
started.
was amazing.
Wow.
We
James is like, that was an emotional roller coaster.
James over the past hour has said maybe 2 sentences.
James is
James
probably
over
upside
the past
down.
2 hours was like meta narrative and then dipped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really have too
Um
much comments
I
besides
mean,
that.
I
That is,
didn't have
James, would you
figured
like to
out
have the
really
last
like
word?
I mean, I
uh,
think that we can continue cuz I kind of
Yeah,
Want to
uh
switch to a different subject?
yeah.
Let's do
yeah.
2 hours. 2 hours, baby. Let's
2
go.
hours, let's
We
go.
gotta.
Let's
Let's
go. New
go. Let's
subject. New
go.
subject. New
All right.
Let's
hour. New subject.
go.
Yeah.
New hour. New me.
New hour. We gotta do the borders now.
Switch personality. Yeah,
boards.
we were like planning on talking about borders. Um cuz I mean it is probably one of the most had arguments that is there. Um and I kind of don't really cuz I had an article from the Mises Institute that I was going to pull up, but it really is just repeating the same stuff that all of us have heard and can recite because we've heard it all so many times. Like, oh, guy, you can have closed borders and still have free trade and yada yada and
It is true that like I remember when the whole borders thing was happening on Twitter and then everyone was just talking about the borders that I got so sick of the borders that I just like I was thinking about like leaving all of the servers that were talking about the borders at all because they were just annoying me so much. I remember I was in Sue's server with all of her
Leaving?
Twitter
You mean
friends.
emigrating?
What if I
Well,
killed you?
it's just annoying because
um.
there is a clear answer that
Well,
is consistent with libertarianism.
And that is militarize the borders.
yeah, we need to,
True.
dude. You guys all saw the guy on Twitter that was supposedly a mow them down at the borders kind of libertarian.
Most of them.
We need to
That's right.
unleash the
A Lou
cops.
Rockwellian libertarian.
Guys, who I didn't know Lou Rockwell was on Twitter.
Jew Rockwell?
Jew Rockwell.
I mean,
Jew
But
he might
Blackrock?
have, but I don't
I
think he ever
think
posted
also
stuff.
Jew
though,
Black Rockwell.
like even I think also though libertarians will kind of because it's very common for libertarians to like be dismissal of left wing concerns, like be dismissive of oh, we're workplace conditions are not very good, people
Ayn
aren't
Rand
getting
and her
paid very much.
consequences.
um um but then there's also, I think, a lot of dismissal of like concerns that like conservatives will have, which is, oh yeah, you do have a lot of immigrants that are coming in that are committing crimes. Um, right? It is among an immigrant population there's a higher rate of criminals. And I think I think I mean I don't I could be wrong, but it's probably true. Um and then um there's also just the concern of like, oh yeah, they a lot of these people don't speak English, um,
I don't even
and
give a shit if they speak English or not. I'm gonna be
Me,
real. I had
me.
an argument with Schizoid about this, and I remember
I
I
changed my
still went
mind.
in. Oh,
um,
oh,
I
you
mean,
but
I
did?
still hold on to it. It's more of like a minor inconvenience. No one understands the context. Why are we even? We have to explain the context behind this.
Yeah, Schizoid and I had like a long argument about like if it even matters if immigrants speak English or not.
The thing is, the reason why I kind of changed my mind, even though I still think of it as a minor inconvenience that these people come into our country and does not want to speak the language.
Our
Or,
country.
actually,
Our
well,
country,
it's not
that
like
is
they don't want.
kinda...
They do want to speak the language, but oftentimes they kind of like meet halfway in the middle, and it just feels like sometimes like, can we communicate like fully instead of having these awkward, semi-conversations? But I'll also at the same time, like. Mexican immigrants are the backbone of the Californian economy. As a
It's the
Californian,
backbone of most economies in America.
Okay, first
it's
I just
true.
want to say that let's not say our country. That
Yeah.
it sort of
Oh,
leads us
What are you, some
into
kind
like
of
a...
communist?
Well, no, it leads us into sort of wrong playing field.
Okay, when I meant
Wrong.
by our country, when I meant by our country, I mean the arbitrarily drawn up borders by the political parasites. But they did them, and people think of them, so we do gotta consider them not as a real thing, but consider the mental illness that most Americans have, which is believing that borders are real.
Mm-hmm.
True.
I'm not saying the borders are real. I'm just saying the mental illness called statism is real.
Oh,
Well, the borders are real physically. They're just not real, ethically.
You know,
Yeah,
I don't think anyone was
no,
denying
the
that they're
borders.
real physically, so
The wall
I
does
don't know.
not exist.
No, it's
wall
just a
isn't real.
hologram.
This is the hologram.
It is.
Zetetic
Someone,
moment.
someone get Zetetic? We'll have him on eventually.
The
Yo, that'd
plane.
be so fun.
Yeah,
Simulacra.
it just
The planes
depends.
never flew that day.
Yeah, it's
Why they called it a no-fly zone.
That'd be the most viewed podcast episode having Zetetic. I can imagine the title.
dude.
Like
The viewers might not know the context.
Yeah.
Okay.
9/11
Yeah, let's-
landed on the moon, and it's a thumbnail of I don't know. That's a crazy thumbnail.
Yes, Stratino's gonna have fun with that one.
The
Oh
towers.
yeah, no, I'd have a field day with that.
But yeah, as I was saying before, I think a lot of libertarians are too quick to dismiss that a lot of conservatives it is valid concerns, because it is true that there is an excess amount of immigration, but like again, just like the solution to inflation isn't price controls, the solution to inflation is to stop printing money and spending money, but stop the government from spending money, not spending money. The solution to the excess immigration is to cease the incentive structure which is causing it to happen, which is the crazy amount of fucking welfare that's provided, right? I think like immigrants that come into the country are given money by the federal government.
And let's not forget the federal government props up and causes the cartel drug war down in Mexico.
Absolutely.
And then brings the crime up here. As much as I don't want to sound like Donald Trump, because most of the people coming over the border are actually honest working people. I face them all the time where I live. They are genuinely good people, and I welcome them here because they are helpful and good people. But also the cartel comes up in here, and that's not good at all either.
Mm-hmm.
Which is caused by the federal government. Their high interventionism with the war on drugs caused the cartel that we see in Mexico, and they drive the crime back up in here.
Yeah.
Right
I
up
mean, we
into
just
my
have to
asshole.
think
I'm
of...
at the epicenter of this bullshit.
I mean, we just have to think of everything from a thick approach, a thick libertarian approach,
I
where we
am so
actually
thick.
analyze.
I'm such a thick
I
libertarian.
am a thick boy.
I'm a thick boy.
You could say I am
James
the
has
thickest
been using
libertarian.
thick libertarianism in a completely different way than I thought it was used.
That is off topic, Stratino.
Off topic.
Well,
yeah,
James
actually
said
going
it.
off
So it's
topic.
not,
I mean,
so
I was
true.
using it in Roderick Long's sense, so...
Roderick from Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Thick.
Loaded diaper.
Okay, we're getting off topic. Borders.
Okay.
I mean, unless
I will-
anyone else has anything to say, I feel like there isn't much more to say on the topic.
I have things.
I mean,
to
maybe we could
unless
sort
we
of
want to
address
run
the...
through the argument in case, like, just make the argument as to why borders are.
So,
Go
I
for it, gamer. I believe in
I'm-
you.
Okay, I was gonna
Oh,
say.
I don't
I
believe.
was gonna say things, but okay.
I mean, I was thinking about sort of maybe a hobby in arguments, which actually does relate to welfare, which is just... it's just simply saying you can't have a welfare state and open borders, which is
I
definitely an
The
iffy
solution: we
argument.
need a
And not
welfare state and
maybe
closed borders.
Bro, is my
iffy is an
microphone even
This is
working?
true
No,
hockey. Yeah, I hear you.
is an
not.
understatement.
Okay, I want to say something.
Go right ahead, sweetie.
Tino crashed out.
Okay. Okay, so because I do want to relate the borders argument by, I guess, conservatives and paleo libertarians all the way back to a very common statist argument that is made, where it's like, oh, well, without the state in this area, X amount of crime will happen and it'll just be chaos, and chaos will ensue, and all of that. It's actually kind of a package deal. It's the idea that without the state in a specific area, it is determined that, these people will act this way because I guess this is just the deterministic nature of man. Absolutely
The
not.
state
A
of
lot of
nature.
a lot of the immigrants, which, I mean, yeah, it's kind of the Hobbesian argument. A lot of immigrants which come over, and sure, there are some that can do crime. It's possible for them to do crime. It is not a guarantee for them to do crime, just as a removal of a crime syndicate such as the state does not, I mean, does like does not necessitate crime and looting and thievery and murder. However, a state existing and staying in that area, trying to quote unquote prevent crime in the way that they do so, absolutely does not get rid of the issue of crime. If your institution which attempts to rid crime is based on crime, then as Rothbard said, you have not gotten rid of the crime. The crime is still there. We can apply this to the borders. Sure, it is possible for immigrants to commit. Like it's in the possibility for them to commit crimes. However, a this is not a deterministic facet of their nature. However, it is intrinsic to the state for them holding these irreprehensible arbitrary territories around the border. That is necessarily a crime. There is no way to alleviate crime via means of the state, because the means of which they are trying to prevent crime is crime itself. However, this is no issue with the open borders argument. There is no necessary crime within the open borders argument, and it's purely caused by optional choices made by people who cross the border.
Well, it's almost
Yay.
as if paleo assumptions and status assumptions are almost interchangeable.
Oh, so true.
Unironically.
Real?
It quite literally just goes back to like blacks are genetically determined to commit crime, and I'm not even kidding with that. That is just genuinely what it's sort of implicit, like even implicitly. Some of them do it explicitly, but I think that implicitly it is a racist premise.
We also fail to see, beyond the fact that uh, restricting borders is not the way how you deal with criminals. And to further that point, criminals have rights too. You can't just punish a criminal in any way. It has to be appropriate, it has to be proportional, and oftentimes it's not about imprisoning them or restricting their movement. It's about giving back what they've stolen or charging them for the damages that they have caused, etc., etc. It's about paying back the victim. It's not about imprisoning them, or restricting them from a whole third of a continent. But
Exactly.
And
but
I want to,
no,
unless
I
you
had a
want to talk
point.
more on that.
No, I had a point.
Yeah,
Please,
say it then, because
please.
I was gonna.
It's really quick, please.
Yeah,
Okay,
say it.
anyways. We also forget the economic benefit of immigrants coming in and literally improving our economy. And it brings up a different argument that the right will often make, is that they're taking our jobs. Good. Let them take the jobs. Okay? It
Okay.
improves our economy. It goes right back to the broken window fallacy.
Exactly. And
Eh,
I will also oh,
Well, I was just gonna use that as like a jumping off point to go into talking about like a justice system, because Jet was talking about like about like, oh,
I'm Jet. It's
how
me. I'm Jet.
yes,
People may not think of me as Jet, but I am Jet. Carry on.
um how, oh well, justice needs to be proportional, punishment needs to be proportional, and it's more ideal if justice is more reparational as opposed to punitive. And I think
Resti-
restitutive
restitution.
as opposed to punitive.
Hmm.
um and I think it's very important to like say, because I think a lot of libertarians haven't like thought about it at all, that generally, like a lot of cases, more harm comes from like punitive justice than would otherwise, right? Compensatory justice is absolutely like, um that's obviously, nobody's going to, you would be insane to refute that, right? If somebody had something stolen, that stolen thing absolutely should be returned. But however, oh well, I had this thing stolen from me, and but instead of getting back damages, I want simply some sort of harm to befall that person. That's what gain, or what, how is that righting this wrong, right? The purpose of like aspiring towards justice should be to make it so that it is as if that wrong never occurred, because we
Hmm.
acknowledge that wrong should not have occurred, so we should try and make it so that that wrong never occurred. However, like, let's say someone breaks my arm, and then I proceed to, have them pay for the medical bills to fix my arm, but then also to break his arm. What's been gained from that? I don't gain anything, right? I'm not actually, like, sure, there might be like the emotional, like, oh, I feel better now, but is that really like benefiting you in any way? Like, is that actually bringing you any real happiness beyond just, oh, he did this to me, so I want it done to him, right?
I think the
It's
non-infringement on their rights makes your life better.
And
huh?
further, two wrongs don't make a right. If you
Yes.
break his arm back, is there a justification that you had the right to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Some libertarians may point to the estoppel principle, but I would
Oh
disagree
no.
with the estoppel principle, which is a different discussion.
I
What
mean,
the
I
fuck?
would. I
What
also
the fuck
disagree
was
with
that,
the
Stratino?
double
I'm
principle.
making a
Stratino,
Donald Duck
you don't do it.
impression.
You can't match mine.
Yeah, I can't. I can't. I can't. I
All right, all
can't.
right. Enough of that.
Okay, so I think another point is that if immigrants are committing crime and the state is doing nothing about it, you know what? Good. That's exactly. I say that it's good that the state is doing absolutely nothing about the immigrants committing crimes. I'd be happier if the state were doing nothing about it and it were delegated down to the people in order to create economic incentives to stop such
Oh, you know
immigrant.
what's worse than all of that? The
What?
state preventing vigilante justice.
Uh huh.
Ayn Rand moment.
Which is probably what I would say that's what the Democrats do. They let criminals come here, and then instead of us performing vigilante justice on them, the state prevents us from exercising that because the state prevents us from exercising vigilante justice to its fullest extent, usually anyways. And so then the state doesn't do anything about the crime, and
And
then
then they eat our
everything is
cats.
fucked.
Yeah, I
And
mean
then they're eating the
So
dogs and they're eating the
so
cats.
true.
the state as an institution
It's true.
is subverting our abilities to actually act freely and perform these
Hmm.
norms, our own
Mm-hmm.
interpersonal norms, preventing
It is
such
true. Like
occurrences.
it is true that we face a crime issue with open borders. We're still open borders based on principle, and we still think that open borders actually overall benefits us. But it still is worth noting that it does bring crime, and well, there's a proper way how to deal with that. And not only does the state do nothing, they do worse than nothing. They prevent us from even enacting it,
And
enacting a vigilante justice.
Exactly.
a lot of a lot of like closed border, libertarian types will try and like make the argument, oh, well, think what would happen if we immediately got rid of all like border regulations. Like, oh, it would be a disaster. As if that's like some sort of like thing that libertarians stray away from. Like every libertarian should recognize that if we immediately right now got rid of the state in its entirety, there would be a disaster in terms of like crime and crime being like the major thing, and then there would also be an immediate recession, right? We acknowledge that this is true, but
Not even just a recession, probably the death of the economy,
yeah,
since our
complete
economy is
collapse of the
based
economy.
on fiat money, and if the state goes, then fiat money is worth less than toilet paper.
Mm-hmm.
So that would so we should buy a little bit of gold.
Maybe.
So
Recessions are never necessarily bad.
Yeah.
No, it's true. That is true.
Recessions, by definition, are a good thing. It is.
Well, wait,
Well, I
that
mean,
is
not
also
good.
not true.
Not. I'm just saying
Well,
they're not intrinsically good or
recessions.
bad.
Right, yeah, because
Is
recessions
good.
can
Not
happen
all
as a
recessions
result
are
of.
busts.
Yeah.
Not all recessions are part of the boom bust cycle, but
Yes.
the bust is the good part, and that's a
Yes.
whole entirely different subject for a different episode.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can have recessions that are happen like, oh, there was an earthquake and like all of the infrastructure got destroyed, and now there's a recession, whatever.
Austrians be like, good.
Earthquakes are good.
you ain't my earthquake.
I
Earthquakes are
You make my
natural.
earthquake. You
Cultivate
make my
earthquakes.
earthquake.
I forget what I was saying.
Sorry.
It's
You were
fine.
talking about if the government disappeared,
Oh
not
yeah,
everything will be
yeah, yeah,
hunky dory.
yeah. Like as if libertarians completely stray away from this point. Like, oh, uh, there would be bad consequences immediately if this happened, right? Libertarians completely acknowledge that and take those positions anyway because we acknowledge that some things are just wrong to do and that you shouldn't do them no matter what. And we recognize that in the long term, it will have better outcomes.
I think
Yep.
the other thing is that it's completely illogical to think that the state will just. I call this like in the what if you steal a penny hypothetical to save the world. Like it's that sort of hypothetical, those invalid hypotheticals where it's like, okay, so what if there's like a sentient meteor which is about to like come out and there's like a you have to steal a penny like I'm not even
Candy bar
going to engage
Russians.
argument because that's just utterly ridiculous. Not only is it utterly ridiculous, but it's just completely contradictory reality. It's the same thing with though. Okay, what if the state just vanished? What? What do you mean? What if it just vanished? It just disappeared? Where'd it go?
If the U.S. federal government vanished, guess what would happen? It would be one of two things. Either A, it would immediately reappear, or
Exactly.
B, we'd break up into smaller states, and then probably from that, either they stay smaller states, or they come back together and form a federal government. And it makes no sense to abolish the federal government when the people, the American people, prop up the American government through their values, their votes, and their philosophy. Um, and so if you would get rid of the federal government, what you're really thinking about is like getting rid of the American people and replacing them with a completely different homogenous set of people. Not saying the American people are homogenous, but I'm just saying that if you're thinking about like, oh, what if the state disappeared? Well, the
Mhm.
only way that like can even be conceivably possible in your mind, not in reality, but in your mind, is that you would have to also think of a completely different society too,
Mhm.
because
Well,
the political structure is a reflection of the how the
The
society's
philosophy of the
values.
day.
Exactly,
I,
society's values. And if you
I
had a no political structure, that would reflect society's values. But you can't have no political structure and society's values would reflect a political structure. It would make no
I
sense.
mean, I don't think that those are reflective of one another exactly. Political structure and values of individuals. I think, um, as I said, I've said this before, multiple times, including on this podcast. But I sort of, I, I characterize political structure as a means by which the state can sort of harness their own efficiency.
Well,
And
James, you've been outvoted 3 out of 4.
So true.
yes,
And I
I
think
could probably go on a whole tangent about that, but
I
Go
actually
off,
have like a
Queen.
oh oh.
Come on,
What
let's
is
hear some James. Let's get some James action in here. It's boring.
I'll let some James in.
Let's
Yeah.
get some James in here. Go off, James.
okay?
He will be allowed one sentence.
One one sentence. Okay. Um.
Not
Well,
actually.
I'm just saying that the state, as in I envisioned it as multiple sectors, which are sort of in reciprocal relationships with one another, which they have heterogeneous interest ultimately, yeah, but the way in which they converge sort of creates their own internal system, which maximizes the efficiency for both parties involved. Rather, this compares to a more sort of traditional view, maybe, of the state as a organization where particular people have unconditional control over the institution, which allows for ideology to sort of maneuver the state, ideology, values, and such. But I, I don't values in a more philosophical sense, not just utility exactly. Yeah, you get what I mean with that. Um, but I do reject that more traditional view, and I think that a lot of these ideas about ideology maneuvering the state does rely on that.
Yacht Queen. Okay, let's go back on topic.
I actually do have like a good because there's I have to remember what the hell we were even talking about again. Um
Borders, and if the state disappeared.
We don't have
oh
to
yeah, if
stay
the
on
state
topic. We don't have to stay
I
on the topic of borders.
well I like the topic because I was gonna say
Fuck
something
you,
really
gamer.
Stratino likes
Kill
borders?
yourself.
so true. Um, because there's what if the state disappeared? There's also that idea of, if the state disappeared, chaos will ensue. Let's remove this stupid idea that the state would just disappear, pop out of existence. You wake up in the twilight zone and the state is gone. Let's get actually back into reality and understand that it is,
Snap back to reality.
philosophy. Snap back to reality. Oop, there goes the state. Let's go back into this like reality where philosophy is the driver of these sorts of things, these sorts of institutions, the structures of men which arise. There is a common argument that the anarchist theory is, without the state, chaos will ensue. um and I think what makes them believe that this is something I've just thought about. What makes them believe that chaos has not already ensued at the hand of the state every waking moment that they're alive? Like, surely mass funded war and genocide and terrorism and theft and forestallment, institutionalized and systematized by the state, is not chaos itself already. Not only chaos, but apocalypse. Like, could chaos ensue under anarchism as like a faint possibility? Potentially. However, under the philosophy of statism, it is a given. The statist who wishes to throw such a point upon you is being completely fallacious because he's choosing to evade the blatant chaos necessitated by the state already as if it's not even chaos, and then tries to spin the chessboard around you and say, you know, if the state's gone, chaos will happen. Okay, sure, it could happen. However, under the state, it is happening. And that's all that will ever happen under the state. The state is a sign of chaos. The state is the marker of chaos. Anarchism is not such. And it's actually the opposite, because anarchism is a philosophy of peace. It is the philosophy which rejects chaos and apocalypse. It's for harmony among men. What is the idea that chaos would ensue from a philosophy of peace and harmony among men? Absolutely none. It is the state which necessitates this chaos. Okay, I'll shut up.
There and then also it's the classic oh, but wouldn't warlords take over? Oh yeah, so given that there's an off chance that someone like amasses enough influence to become a warlord in an anarchist world, so the solution to prevent that from happening is to make it so that there is guaranteed a warlord that rules over everyone.
Yet, sounds perfectly logical to me.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Yeah, I mean,
cruel.
all you're saying is simply, I prefer our current warlords over these potential warlords.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
And
we have a
also
state.
I think it's sort of like a niche thing, or not niche, a very small thing, but I think it does change things, because like Stratino mentioned, oh yeah, the result of the state is theft, but I think it's more that the state is the result of crime.
I think it's both.
I think it's neither. No, just kidding.
And
And
I think
well,
here's
I just I sorry,
Mm,
I just want to elaborate on what I was saying.
yeah.
That the state came out of crime, right? Like the state comes out of conquest, right? The state doesn't just magically appear and then start stealing from people. People were stolen from, and then the thieves formulated into a state, which then, uh, and then you have the state that exists because of theft, right? You don't have theft because of the state. Um, I there was a really good point that I was going to with this, but then I got distracted by something. Um,
and I
we can just go on.
and I'm trying to remember my point now.
I fucked everything
um,
up.
bro got goon zapped. Um,
Goonzap is being added to the list of banned words.
Weasel?
remember. I remember. So, um, I think that a corollary to my point about, a chaos will ensue. I actually think it's antecedent to it. Is that this idea is a stolen concept fallacy? Is the idea that practice comes before theory? That it's some sort of idea that the practice of anarchism will occur before the theory is even put into place, therefore chaos will ensue, because everything will just be this is actually where the idea what if the state disappeared tomorrow comes from. It's what if anarchism occurred in practice, but none of the theory was antecedent to it for it to ever come into fruition in the first place. It's a violation of causality, and that's why it's a stolen concept fallacy. It's taking the concept of anarchism in practice and removing the antecedent anarchism in theory in order for it to ever come into fruition. So
I
it
think
is.
it's just more so that if the
Oh no.
state were to instantly vanish, we would still have these norms around property that would necessitate a state to defend certain titles and such, which would emerge. Um, which is why I am a huge advocate of counter economic activity, sort of decoupling
Mm-hmm.
these relationships.
Yeah, it's this like idea of, or like this um concept of like how, oh, in order to have anarchy you need to get the philosophy of statism out of the people. That is also proof of like you can't use politics to get anarchy, because in doing so, okay, let's say, in November everyone writes in Marcus Downing on their ballot, and I just pass an executive order, oh, the state no longer exists, every single government building is shut down, and so on. Then um okay, now we face that problem, right? Because the philosophy of statism hasn't been taken out of the people.
And it's
People are
because they are
still
engaging in
statist. They're not
Well,
anarchists. They're not going to bring about
I,
anarchy.
I wasn't exactly arguing like, out of perspective from a theory of philosophy. Really, I was simply
Well,
saying,
this was I was gonna say even before you brought up counter
No, yeah,
economics.
no, and I actually agree with gamerism. This was something that I criticized about Malay. I've heard so many people say, oh, Malay getting elected represents a philosophy of anarchism. Absolutely not. Do you notice that people are still voting? They're still engaging in state, boundaries. They're still engaging in the system of the state. How is this anarchism in any way? They're still engaging in politics. They're still seeing politics as fruitful. What in the world?
Well, yeah, I mean, all that Milei is doing is actually assisting the state. He's being an efficiency manager
Yeah,
for the state and helping its political economy, because ultimately,
he's
what he promotes is
increasing
an idea where
longevity.
we have this trade, okay, that occurs upon these fiat property titles, and thus enriching the state and their institutions. And they'll only use this for more malice.
I also like related to my point about like anarchism in practice, but without the theory. Can I go on a bit of a like a not a bit of a tirade, but it's relevant to
Well,
that point.
I just want to real quick, um,
Okay.
the idea, like what James just said about how, Millet and like if you had an anarchist, supposedly an anarchist that was like president in the U.S., right? They would be assisting the state because in order for the philosophy of statism to be taken out of the minds of the people, what needs to happen, and this is sort of like where I think more anarchists need to be sort of accelerationists, is that it's more likely to happen when the state is doing more terrible things, when the state is being more like blatantly evil, right? When it's being doing things that are so bad that even their propaganda can't cover it up. And when
Vietnam is
things like that happen, when the state accelerates its or when statism accelerates, that is when you have the seeds of anarchy, or when anarchy begins to sprout in the populace.
Hmm.
exactly. And
Yeah, I mean, um, I would just say that. Hmm, um, yeah, this does tie back into sort of what I was saying earlier about a decoupling between our own market activity and fiat property titles, and thus sort of become nomadic in a way to where we're not allowing the state to enforce its rule, create situations such as artificial scarcity and whatnot, um, which some libertarians even don't recognize themselves as a legitimate concept.
yeah. And I guess, like I said, am I allowed to go on a bit of like, because I had made that I guess I'll go on a bit of a point, and it's a bit of a long point, but it does tie back into this idea of anarchism in practice, but without much of the theory, because this is a real big issue, and it even within the anarchist communities, there's an issue. And I think that it also kind of comes from, this idea of this is the price we pay for a free society, because that's sort of the position that John Locke or Robert Nozick, which is kind of the most, academically well regarded libertarian, quote unquote, because, he had far less radical and more watered down theories. And the idea of the position was, minarchism. It seeked to limit the state as much as possible to whatever arbitrary extent they wished. So, some are more limiting on freedoms of individuals than others, which is truly a testament to its complete arbitrariness. However, I think that the most coherent formulation of the minarchist position is the night watchman state, which seeks to limit the state apparatus to, mere property protection with a right to secede from that service, making kind of whatever state they seek to establish scarcely even like an actual state. It's kind of like, I guess, Mises's pan-secessionism sort of thing. It's anarchism in practice, but without the theory. And that's precisely the issue with the night watchman state position. It's the practice of anarchism without that antecedent theory that's needed to arrive at such a system in the first place. The order of operations are just completely switched around. Because the antecedent theory, the philosophy of anarchism, is required for successful realized anarchism to function in the first place. Like I said, it's a stolen concept fallacy. It's rearranging the two around. And I think once the theory of anarchism is established, There is no such night watchman state that will come from it. No desire to work within the already established status framework will exist. Because the spirit of anarchism will radically change the modern institutions of today so starkly that it's entirely nonsensical to imagine an anarchist framework within political bounds such as our, night watchman state sort of thing. If and let's say such an institution were to ever occur naturally, everyone would secede. I think just kind of in summary, like the night watchman status is simply kind of clasping on to the tropes of the modern political landscape, which is exactly what you can see a lot of the Malay supporters being. They're night watchman statists. It's this idea that we want the structures of today, but we want our cake. We want to eat our cake and have it too. We want anarchism, but with the things that anarchism will get rid of. And it's that sort of thing that we need to be so cautious of because it shows that people are not understanding anarchism. They want anarchism in practice, but without the theory, and it's because they don't understand the theory. Anyway, that was a bit of a long rant, but I actually think it was quite coherent.
Thank you, Stratino, for your wisdom.
So
I just got reminded of something a moment ago. And I'm gonna pull it up even though I originally wasn't planning on pulling up anything this episode. Or I'll send the link to it to you guys in the Discord. But I'm gonna pull up a tweet from Alice Decay, who he is ANCAP Twitter account, pretty solid on most things, but it relates to something I mentioned earlier about sort of refusing to acknowledge problems and just hearing something be like, "Oh, that's a leftist thing." Oh, or that's a conservative thing. We should immediately just dismiss that problem altogether. Like, when we're talking about immigration, I was like, "Oh, we shouldn't just completely dismiss these concerns altogether. We should point to what the actual cause of the problem that they're talking about is." Um, and so Alice Decay is responding to, or is quote tweeting a Rothmus tweet. Who Rothmus is like a paleocon account or a paleo libertarian account, and he posts a lot of shit that's like not very libertarian. However, he he posts something, circling some company's policy saying sick days. We no longer accept a doctor's note as proof of sickness. If you are able to go to the doctor, you are able to come to work. He just posts this, says bruh. Alice Decay quote tweets this. Rothmus's increasing leftism, as it, and then I replied to it. This is cringe, or quote. This is cringe, and I don't like that they do this. Reply, and then someone replies, "What are you, some sort of communist?" Right? Because it's too many libertarians do things like this, where you can point out concerns, which like it's pretty fucking stupid to say, "Oh, if you can go to the doctor, you're able to come to work." That's stupid. That's a bad policy, and we should all point to that and say that's not a good policy that people should be having for their companies. And then to say, "Oh, this is leftist. You shouldn't be having these concerns. Having these concerns doesn't makes you not a real libertarian. You're a leftist if you think this." It's one of the worst things that I've seen within libertarianism.
May
It's
I
almost
add
as if
something?
it's
Yeah.
almost like I just
Go ahead,
um
James.
yeah, I was gonna make a little sort of joking comment, but it's almost as if the state and its political economy creates artificial scarcity and and limits proper information to be conveyed within what would otherwise be a free market, and allows for this sort of stuff to occur,
Right.
forcing
Um,
people to conform to these standards.
and my point is that in this sense of the word leftism, which is in this specific sense being concerned for the health of the workplace, uh, that's good.
yeah,
Yeah, let's do increase leftism in certain ways.
I
There's
think
a reason why there is the term left Rothbardian is simply, taking the ideas of Rothbard in his analysis of the state and applying how the state affects other parts of the economies and kind of coming to similar conclusions that other leftists come to, which oftentimes leftists do have legitimate concerns and we should be concerned for them. And so increasing leftism, hey, you know what? In this sense, I'm all for it.
Yeah, which I
I
mean,
Well,
I suppose specifically, left Rothbardian conclusions we're coming to are similar to that of the classical anarchists, more specifically, um,
Exactly.
well, I
which are
think
Exactly.
often considered leftists.
I don't like the term left Rothbardian, and I don't like
base.
really using the terms left and right altogether
I
beyond
also
just simply describing cultural associations, because there are right-wing positions and left-wing positions that are the same, but you can present it in a way that's left-wing that makes it a left-wing position, or and you can present it in a way that makes it a right-wing position. Right, and you can just look at like historical figures. You know, Stalin was a leftist, Hitler was a right winger. However, they are super close policy wise. Um, and
As
and
Mises put it, socialism of the German variety and socialism of the Russian variety.
right,
That's how Mises referred to the two.
and and the way left and right is used is people will try and like attribute like policies to the left wing, but there isn't specific ideas that are associated with leftism versus right wing versus like being right wing. Um, in fact, you know, policy or ideas of like left wingers, caring about like the workers and the common man are also very common among like the populist right. And it's just it's different aesthetics basically is the dividing line because they're tribal associations. They're not actual ideas that are associated with left and right. The closest thing that you could come to, right? Like you can try and come up like divide it any way you want, but you're ultimately not making sense once you start like, once you stray away from the the fact that it's just tribal associations and start trying to apply a definition like, oh, left wingers want more government, right wingers want less government. Okay, yeah, so you're calling Proudhon a right winger? Is that like the conclusion that you've come to?
I think
Verdun was right wing because he hated the Jews with all his
True.
fiber being.
True.
true.
Karl
I
Marx,
think
my favorite right winger, because on the Jewish question.
I I'd like to make a point here about DK's tweet because I think that it is alluding to so much vulgar libertarianism, and I think that it also fundamentally misunderstands the idea of libertarianism and anarchism in the first place. Under libertarianism and anarchism, we have a right to be angry about when specific policies are done in a workplace that we don't like. Because under anarchism and libertarianism, we're the consumers. We're the ones who, of course, when it's a voluntary cooperation. And when we see policies we don't like, we have full right to be upset about them and not just take them lying down. And this is, I think, the idea that we must take policies by people lying down with no complaint, even if the property owner of a workplace has a right to do those specific things, we as the consumers, as the workers, as any member of that division of labor, we still have a right to be upset about those things. We have to put in our say and make our stand on what we believe because that's how a market works. That is how a market should function. And I think that they fall into one of the most egregious parts of statism, which is the idea that we should just simply take things lying down. Is I mean, like hell, like what is someone moral if they just simply choose to not think of the alternatives? think of if they don't like something or not, and to have a good reason to not like something or not, and to take their stand. Absolutely not. It's immoral to try to attempt to just comply and to just obey. That is a statist mindset. That is a mindset of statism, as to say, yep, he just has the property right over this thing and I shouldn't say anything about it. Even if he does have the right, we have rights. And our right is to be angry, and it is to act as a consumer and to go to different workplaces and to say, hey, this is a bad idea. You're acting in a completely stupid way. um, I mean, how the hell do they think a market works? Do do they think that there's just an oligarchy of men which, produce products and we just consume them without any thought or without any inquiry into the process of making those products? Absolutely not. We analyze them. We use our reason to evaluate things and we take our stands on things. That's how anarchism and libertarianism should work. So when we see workplaces doing those things, hell yeah, we should speak out about them. It's not just property rights. There's morals on top of the property rights, which we must take stands on. I think it's absolutely retarded how someone like this would say something like that.
And because it's also something that you'll see among like a similar thing that you'll see among like just talking about like culture wars, right? And like a more paleo leaning libertarian will say something about like gay people and how oh, it's probably for the better, like gay people probably it's for the better that they act non-gay or whatever, right? It's immoral to be gay or something along those lines. And you'll see more progressive libertarians that'll be like, oh, how dare you? They have a property right and they can do what they want with their body. That's not what they're saying. They're not saying that gay people shouldn't be allowed to be gay. They're saying that gay people shouldn't be doing what they're doing. And regardless of the truth of that statement, that's not. They're not prescribing, oh, we should now aggress upon this person. They're making a statement about morality, and you should be attacking that statement itself if you disagree with it. You shouldn't be attributing things that aren't there.
And I think that here's one thing that I think this is one of Murray Rothbard's most brilliant points. And I will try to attempt to take his argument where he applies it to the state, but I want to take his argument and then apply it to this philosophy of the state, this moral code that I think is very similar to this. Like I said, this sort of thing where we just shut up and obey is a very statist mindset that DK is trying to make. But Rothbard makes the point that, suppose that we have the demonstrable conclusion that, actions A, B, and C are immoral and actions X, Y, and Z are moral. And we have, Mr. Jones shows a propensity to the he wants to choose those immoral values and adopts those courses of actions time and time again. Like, are we interested in, I guess the question is, should we enforce by the state? This is something that I guess Rothbard is pointing out. The idea of the statist mind says that we must prohibit at gunpoint Mr. Jones from doing A, B, and C. Then at last he will be moral. But will he? Because is Mr. Jones moral because he chooses X when he's forcibly deprived of the opportunity to choose A? Like when, I guess, Mr. Jones is confined to a prison. Is he being moral because he doesn't spend his time in saloons getting drunk or something like that? There is no sense in any concept of morality, regardless of the particular moral action someone favors, if he's not to choose and to not be free to choose the immoral as well as the moral thing. If a man is not free to choose, he is compelled by force to do the moral thing. Then, on the contrary, he's being completely derived of the opportunity of being moral. He has not been permitted to weigh those alternatives and to arrive at his own conclusions and to take his stand, like I said before. If he's deprived of free choice, then he's acting under the dictator's will rather than his own. Now let's apply this to this sort of workplace. If we apply this philosophy of statism, where we're just we just work under the, I guess, whoever the property owner's will is. We just comply. Are we truly being moral in that instance? If we're just simply acting upon the whims of an owner instead of being a proper consumer, which is to, weigh the alternatives and to arrive at our own conclusions and to take our own stand, are we being moral in that instance? I think even if we're not held at gunpoint to do it, the philosophy of statism is still there, where we're just simply complying to the whims of other people instead of being proper consumers and evaluating alternatives and using our reason to evaluate specific things and then taking our stand. We're not being moral there. And I made that point before, but I think that Rothbard's point here is so brilliant. And I think that even held at gunpoint or not, it's something that a lot of libertarians just simply believe because of course the business owner has a property right over what they're enforcing, but we still have equally a right to secede from them and not to just blindly obey them.
Yeah, and right, a moral man isn't a man who acts morally. A moral man is a man who chooses morally. And does anyone else have anything to say on that point? Because I think, because we're approaching the 2 hour mark, I think we'll
I
wrap it
mean,
up there.
I suppose I just like to say that a lot of people are missing that idea of self-sufficiency, which is what we're striving for,
It's a
right?
philosophy of individualism, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's sort of all I have to say.
I actually
Right.
think this is my favorite episode so far.
Yeah. It definitely the last one got a little bit rocky with with
My
your
mic.
connection, but yeah.
Yeah.
I
Last one got
am
rocky without me. I am the anchor.
true.
I actually kind
Um
of like think Schizoid is really good here to bounce back shit.
yeah. But
Thank you.
right. I am Marcus Downing. You can find me on YouTube at Real Gamerizer. You can find me on Twitter at Gamerizer underscore. And you can find me on Instagram, Marcus A. Downing. James?
Should have said that in the beginning.
Well, it no. Usually,
No.
usually shows end with that.
Why don't shows begin with that?
I
Because it
don't know.
takes forever to get to the show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like,
The-
I disagree.
because like the idea is like, oh, you're going to do this after you're finished watching the show. You're not going to do it while you're watching the show.
I respect your opinion, but not
Yeah, but
me.
most people don't finish the show anyways.
Whatever.
Who
Whatever.
finishes podcast anyways? You start a podcast, you listen for 30 seconds, you click off, you go do something else, you
Yeah.
watch YouTube short
Yeah,
videos.
yeah.
It's all a waste of
Looking
time.
at the analytics on these episodes, yes.
Yes.
Anyway,
I
They
James.
know
listen to the first
Dip.
3 seconds, all they get to hear is just Stratino go, "Ah!"
James.
Woo!
Thank you,
Uh,
James.
so, yeah, I mean, you could just find me at James Liberated on YouTube, and at Liberty James on Twitter or X.
Stratino.
Yeah, you know where to find me.
Okay. And Schizoid.
You could find me on YouTube at _schizoid_man. Do not get confused with the song 21st Century Schizoid Man. In retrospect, my name was bad branding, but I really like King Crimson.
Yeah, kill yourself.
And
Okay.
then also the link to join the living room Discord server will be in the description. All right.
Come and get your furry porn.
No, that's not in there.
Uh, I mean,
Come and
there's a
get
boy
James'
emoji,
collection
but
of boy kisser memes.
Yeah,
that is.
if
I
you
don't
want
know
that,
what
DM James. He can. That's
Yeah.
James.
it is.
We do not associate with that.
We do not associate with James.
Yeah. We only talk to him for the show.
No,
We would put him
don't
back
even
down in
talk
the
to him.
basement and lock him up, and then he can
All
start
right, yeah.
thinking
Well,
about
I'm ending the show before we continue this.
Yeah.
Welcome to the third episode of the Living Room Podcast. I am Marcus. I am joined with James the Liberated
Hello.
and Stratino Lampino.
And what about Schizoid?
We don't talk about him.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Not anymore.
We're
fuck
done.
that.
Oh yeah.
Are you really gonna correct my grammar, Stratino?
Come on, you know.
You don't
me.
get to introduce yourself. And the Schizoid man.
I am the Schizoid man.
No, you're not.
No, he's the he's the Schizoid man.
I am
He's
the Schizoid man.
All right, yeah.
Oh.
So
I am James.
we'll start off.
Got a
Stratino
locked in,
and
guys.
Schizoid both seemed excited to argue about this on the show.
I was
We're arguing?
excited, but
Yeah, the topic that you suggested that we talk about that apparently the two of you disagree on.
I suggested a topic.
oh my god.
Oh my god.
What did I suggest?
I'm pretty sure it was you. Oh no,
Was
that
it
was
gender?
It was Stratino.
Yeah.
Yes,
Was it gender?
yes.
It
I'll
wasn't
leave
me.
the.
It was you brought it up, and then I reminded.
Well, yeah, you brought it up in the chat where we were talking about topics.
Yeah, because Schizoid brought it up,
Yeah, so it was you that suggested it as a topic.
and Schizoid as well. It was both
Yes.
of us.
Well, he wasn't there, and clearly he didn't know because he.
God, he was the one who recommended it, and then I recommended it again. Oh my god.
This is already off to a great start.
Come on, it wouldn't be a living room episode without like a blundered beginning.
Yeah.
You've got to do better, Senator.
God damn it, James.
We're not playing Discord sounds on the fucking podcast.
That actually might warrant restarting.
What?
I'm here for it. Let's do a Lockman one more time.